Hi, I'm Gary Alt, Open Path Life Coach, and this is the third in a series that I started about 2 years ago on cognitive dissonance. I did parts one and two about 2 years ago. And if you remember, if you're one of the few people that saw it, I used the piano and music to kind of talk about cognitive dissonance because dissonance, the word dissonance, has to do with music. It means basically conflicting tones or bad tones or anything like that. And then nowadays we use the word cognitive dissonance to describe what happens in our brain when there are conflicting thoughts. So our unconscious rather mind has a thought or a belief in it that's long held and cherished perhaps, and the conscious mind now takes in something new that just came to us through a video or conversation or whatever, and our reticular activating system RAS takes the new information and compares it with digs up the old information and compares the two and decides which one is true and which parts of each we're going to keep, and generally the unconscious mind wins. Generally we're generally the type of people that we get comfortable with what we believe, and if anything new comes in that's a little different or a lot different or is absolutely contradictory, we just throw it away. And that's cognitive dissonance, is when you just automatically do that. It's not a bad thing in itself because it is the way our brains work, because it's good to examine new information critically, but it's also good to examine old information critically, right? So we shouldn't just let the old information win just because it happens to be in our brain. So I did those two videos, and frankly, I don't think too many people watched them. It's hard to tell, but I don't think many did. I didn't really get hardly any feedback on them, so I figured, well, maybe it was a bad comparison. I don't know. So recently, I republished one or maybe even two of them, and I just said that nobody liked this first time, but what do you think? And I got a lot of positive responses, including some in emails and text messages, and some that even said, "I'd like to see part three. Could you please post it?" Well, I couldn't post it because this is part three here that we're making right now. So yeah, so that's what I'm doing today. The third part has to do with cognitive dissonance as it relates to neuroplasticity. Now, what does neuroplasticity mean? Well, that's in Psychology Today. I'm just going to read this from Psychology Today. Neuroplasticity is the brain's capacity to continue growing and evolving in response to life experiences. Plasticity is the capacity to be shaped, molded, or altered. Neuroplasticity, then, is the ability for the brain to adapt or change over time by creating new neurons and building new networks. So those are two different things, creating new neurons and building new networks. We'll take the second one first because that's the one that's easier to conceptualize. Creating new or building new networks just basically has to do with new connections being made in the brain. We hear something new every day. We see something new. Something we might even see the same thing that we saw 500 times walking out our front door, but we see something different. The garbage can's there that wasn't there before, whatever, and we tend to remember that. Oh yeah, Mr. Smith must have left his garbage out last night. So we have new memories coming in all the time. That's not necessarily anything remarkable. But also, what happens is that old connections are being strengthened all the time, depending upon its importance to us and how we took it in, what we thought of it when it came to our minds. And it also has to do with repetition. If we see the same thing, we're gonna remember it better. Whereas older connections tend to fade. They kind of weaken over time. Your brain does that deliberately. If it's not used, it figures we don't need this anymore, do we? So that's always happening. New connections are always being formed in our brain, and existing connections are always being strengthened. The first part of that, though, where it said by creating new neurons, that's something that until fairly recent years, the scientific community never believed that happens. When I was growing up, which was many centuries ago, I suppose, I we were always taught that the brain stops growing at some point after birth, and I don't remember if it was 3 months or six or a year, but I'm pretty sure it was under a year. Your brain never gets any bigger, so no new neurons are ever created. But as it turns out, they've discovered that the brain does produce new neurons in certain regions of the brain, like the hippocampus, for example. So that does happen. And the thing is, we don't make it happen consciously. We don't say, "Yeah, I need to grow new neurons today," or "I need to strengthen that connection." So we don't actually make neuroplasticity happen consciously. but it does happen because of the way we use our brains. I want to read the third paragraph from that opening definition of neuroplasticity in psychology today. The importance of neuroplasticity can't be overstated. It means that it is possible to change dysfunctional patterns of thinking and behaving and to develop new mindsets, new memories, new skills, and new abilities. When you read this article further, you realize that when it says new abilities, if we actually learn a new ability, I don't mean just changing jobs where we're doing the very similar thing, but just in a different company. I mean, like we're going from being a computer programmer to being a registered nurse, let's say, where it's a completely different mindset. And we don't have to change careers. It could just be, I don't know, somebody just taught us how to change the oil in our car. And then tomorrow we learn how to fly a kite. It could be anything. It doesn't have to be necessarily complex, but just learning new skills creates neuroplasticity in our brain and makes them more like a brain that is neuroplastic. So, so that's encouraging. And here, they're really not talking about like why we would need to do that. I mean, there are two basic reasons why we would really want to do that. Like try to make that happen. One is if there's any kind of brain damage, and or like brain deterioration, like people that have dementia. The other has nothing to do with injury or damage. It's just that we need to create new ways of thinking, not just new memories. We have to develop new ways of thinking because the old ways are getting us into trouble. Triggers bother us a lot. We're always reminded of things from our childhood that were not good things. The cultic teachings that told us that I'm only worth so much because I'm a woman, or even if I'm a man, I'm only worth so much. And it goes on and on and on. There's all sorts of implications of those teachings, and it's not just Jehovah's Witnesses teachings. It could be any religion, any political group. It could be anything that behaves in a cultic way, where our behavior, information, thoughts, and emotions are controlled, or any one of those are controlled. So we need to learn new ways of thinking, and that's what neuroplasticity is all about. So that relates to cognitive dissonance. But the reason I really wanted to make this part 3 about neuroplasticity is to tell you about something that really helped me, even though I didn't know it at the time. And that has to do with a method that is increasingly used nowadays to help people that need to get their neuroplasticity sort of jump started. And I'll tell you about an example of it. You've probably heard of Gabby Giffords. She was a U.S. representative from the state of Arizona to the Congress in Washington, and she was shot by at a wasn't really I don't know, it was a campaign rally or whatever it was, but it was at a grocery store in the parking lot. Somebody shot her, and the brain entered somewhere near the left eye. I'm not really sure where, but it didn't damage the eye per se, but went all the way through the brain and out the back of her skull. So you know for sure that her brain was damaged irreparably. They can't take brain cells from somewhere else in your body and put it in there. So whatever those brain cells were doing, they're not doing anymore. So she lost the ability to speak. That's called aphasia. She still could think clearly, and she could take in information. She could see you and listen to what you're saying and take it in, but she couldn't speak. So what they did in her case was that they used music therapy. So that's what I want to talk about a little bit. Not necessarily music therapy, but that's what they used in her case. But in our case, it doesn't necessarily have to be therapy. In her case, she had played the French horn when she was younger, and they kind of used that to get her to play the French horn, play new pieces, experience new rhythmic patterns, and different things that were new that corresponded with something that she already knew. And that really went a long way towards helping her. I believe she can speak. I've seen transcripts of various interviews with her, but I haven't seen the interviews on a YouTube video. But apparently she can talk now. It's just that she needs some help or some preparation to do it. But it's like a miracle, and she can be an effective public servant still in a different capacity because of the music therapy. In cases of of dementia, they use it, but it's sort of different. So there are all kinds of different approaches to music therapy. So I'm not recommending any or all of them, because first of all, I really don't know how they work. I don't. I know how music helped me, and I'll tell you about that in a minute, how it can help you. But as therapy, like with actual set therapists, like guiding the process, there are a whole different bunch of different ways to do it that might involve playing certain rhythms and in a way that they can respond to what the person's doing instead of just playing a recorded rhythm, and having the person like tap a tambourine or do some kind of bodily movement in response to what they're hearing. And so all that stuff is music therapy, and it's really helped a lot of people. I don't know if you want to say overcome dementia, but certainly make improvement. So with us, I'm not talking about brain damage or brain deterioration. That might be somebody's situation, and this might help in some small way. But I'm talking really about people who have functioning brains. Your brain was not damaged, no matter how much garbage was fed to it by whatever cult you were in. You might feel damaged, like a damaged person. You might feel like a cripple or a victim. I hope you don't, but that might be, at least for a period of time, the way it felt. But it doesn't actually damage your brain. Your brain still functions. We just kind of have to tap into it and kind of bring back that neuroplasticity, so that as we learn new things, it really can shape our way of thinking, not just create new memories and new thoughts and new knowledge, but change the way we think. So the importance of that is because we develop patterns of thinking about our own self worth. I might have mentioned earlier that are patterns of thinking, and even if we don't believe the actual teaching that led to that, like that women should not talk in the congregation, and they can't possibly be the heads of their house because they're just not built for it. All this nonsense that we learn. We know that that teaching is wrong, but we still may be stuck in that mode where we're a 45-year-old woman that needs to make more money, and you're having a really hard time, getting educated and getting the job you think you should have. And it could have to do with the fact that we still put up blocks because we judge ourselves according to those old thoughts. We just can't get past those thoughts. And it's not just women, but anybody. So how did music help me? I wanted to talk a little bit about that. This is not going to be about me; it's about you. But the only way the reason I thought of this is because of my experience. I'll put it that way. So all of our experiences are different, and some are, it's really silly to compare which is worse or more difficult. But so I'm going to say that in some ways mine was certainly unique and more difficult than others, but in some other ways other people's experiences were far more difficult than mine. I was not a child who experienced child abuse in the organization, for example. I don't know if there's anything worse than that, honestly. So, you know, just just understand that this is not just about me, like I'm the worst case scenario or something like that. But in a nutshell, what happened when I was starting to get out was I say in one night. It really was one night that started it, but it took several days for the full scope of it to finally kind of hit. But I basically lost the entire brotherhood, so-called brotherhood. I lost my entire family, my entire um, the family that I was the father of, my wife and my kids. I essentially lost. I lost my wife immediately. I kind of lost the kids right away. After a few years, I lost them completely. I lost all of what I used to consider the brotherhood. There was a couple of people that would talk to me. The rest, if they saw me in the grocery store or something, they'd say hi because it's before I was in front of a judicial committee, so there wasn't any reason. But just because of rumors and things that they think they observe, that was the situation. So I basically lost all that. I lost my car, my house, my job, my ability to get a new job, which is a story in itself. But believe me, I was not able to get a job in what I was licensed to do, and got spent who knows how much time getting educated to do. It was impossible to get that job back with any company. So I lost bank accounts, job, retirement accounts, car, house, my self-image, my kids, my wife. What else? What else can you lose? All my friends. Um, I don't know. I don't even know. There's other things. If you really listed it, there's a lot of things. So poor me. Oh, gee whiz, let's shed a tear. Well, anyway, the thing is that what helped me get over it was music. Not just because I listened to a lot of music and I played music, but because of the neuroplasticity that results from constant exposure to and immersion in music. Because to me, music is beautiful in itself, and it's also an intellectual thing, whether it's a very simple piece of music or very complex. It's got an intellectual capacity to it. And I'm convinced that I was able to kind of climb out of this huge hole because of the neuroplasticity that was created in part by the music. And that motivated me to kind of get it on with things. So, for example, all right, I woke up one morning, I didn't have any friends left. I just a couple of, and when they talked to me, it was always, Gary, you got to come back to the meetings. You got to come back to the meetings. I mean, I was going to meetings, just not where they wanted me to. But I was going to the Kingdom Hall, just not their Kingdom Hall. Basically what I did was I had a few non-JW friends that I knew through the radio station that I worked at. And I just decided, well, I got to call these guys and just see if we can get together just because I have time now. I don't have all these other things I had to do before. And little by little, I started to realize I was really cementing those relationships and friendships. And I wasn't trying to develop them to the point where I can depend upon them because they really didn't even know half of my story. So they weren't like taking me into their home because they pitied me or something like that. But I was spending time like with my friend Trevor on Friday night. He had a radio show at the station where I worked. And on Friday nights, I'd go down to see him. I'd bring him a cup of coffee or something, and I'd just sit and chat with him for a little bit. And at some point, he said, "Why don't you come back to my house? Because it's just 20 minutes down the road." So he played guitar, I played guitar. So we'd sit there playing guitars all night, singing songs, maybe writing a few things here or there, but not too much of that. And once in a while, I actually stayed over because it got so late. It was like 2 or 3 in the morning, and I had an hour drive home. So why don't you just stay over? So, and a few other people that became very, very good friends, and others that will, were also friends, but will never be in the same circle of trust. That's the way it is. We don't trust everybody we ever meet that we call a friend as much as we trust those 1, 2, or 3 people that are really at the core. And those are the couple. So I met a couple that were at the core. Well, that was all a part of the neuroplasticity. Always, realizing that these are good people. They're not like I was always taught that because they're worldly, you can't trust them. It's okay to say hi, but and we were doing so much music together. With a couple of them, they didn't play an instrument, they didn't sing even, but we all loved music, and we would talk about lyrics and music, and it's all part of that neuroplasticity. And really, any creative process can produce that. Whether we're into visual arts, I'm not because I'm a complete spastic when it comes to drawing a circle in the middle of a piece of paper. I don't even know how you do that without going off a little bit. So I'm my hat off to people that are really good artists, but not the performing arts because I mean the by performing arts I mean like dramatic arts like plays and acting basically movies and plays. I love those arts, but I can't imagine even acting in real life. Like I don't know how to convince somebody of something that by putting on a show. So I'm not interested in it. So forget it. When it comes to the dramatic arts and the visual arts, I'm a complete bozo. But when it comes to music, that's where I excel. So anything that's creative is going to tap into that right part of your brain. But since it's music for me, and the therapy I was talking about before for Gabby Giffords and people with dementia, it's specifically music because there's something about music that taps into different parts of our brain, sort of like language does, like learning a new language, but it's still even different because you have the shape of tones, their relationship to each other, the intervals, the beats. There's a lot to music, and then the lyrics, how that corresponds with the music, and how rhythmically it makes sense with the music. You wouldn't take the lyrics to, I don't know, whatever your favorite song is. Let's say it's an upbeat rock and roll song, and take those lyrics and put them to your favorite love ballad. It probably wouldn't work. So sometimes it does, but so so the lyrics are important too. Their meaning, how clever they are, how they work with the music. Um, so the second part of my recovery was when I actually did um, the research, and this was about 8, no 6. I always forget how to count it. It was about 6 years after the initial whammy where I lost everything, and all kinds of things happened. I had medical bills and lawyers' bills up the kazoo, and I had no money in my pocket, no bank account, no job. How do you do all this stuff? But 6 years after that, 4 years after that, I was put in front of a judicial committee and officially disfellowshipped. 2 years after that, when I still believed it was the truth, and I desperately wanted to believe it was the truth because I thought I loved the truth. And how could everything I've ever believed since the age of 15, how could it be wrong? How could they be wrong? I really thought they were right, even if they were cruel with the way they treated people and not just. So that was why I went into this study, into this research into their beliefs for the first time in how many years. And little by little, I thought, wow, no, this is not right, you know. Um, and I get, at some point I stopped researching because what's the point? Once you find out that they're wrong about 1914, what's the point in researching anything else? Well, I continued a little bit, but really, it's just you get to a point where it doesn't matter anymore. If it's not the truth, it's not the truth. You can believe whatever you want to believe. So there are some things that they teach that I might still believe. I don't really know, but for the most part, no. But the thing is that with a lot of people, it's a great mourning process to finally or suddenly discover that your beliefs are in question or actually wrong. Because we've kind of hung our hat on the idea that all the problems we experience in this life are going to be gone soon. We're not going to have the health problems. We will see our dead loved one again, and it's all going to be in the new system after Armageddon destroys all the wickedness and it's gone forever. And there's no more Satan. It's a fantastic set of beliefs. I mean, that's like a great picture to believe in. So when people all of a sudden realize that that might not be true, after they lied to me about all this other stuff, and they're the people that are countenancing pedophilia and all these other things, and all the other things that we learn over time, uh, they're probably wrong about a lot of that stuff. So there's this mourning process of what do I do now? I don't know what to believe. So I didn't go through that because or I did, but it wasn't a serious thing for me because I already realized that the Brotherhood's a sham. So I already had said, forget that. I don't even want to talk to these people anymore. And then after being disfellowshipped, I didn't go back to the Kingdom Hall again, and I was okay believing that there's a creator, and I don't know, something good's going to happen. I'm not going to worry about it. I'm too busy experiencing life and getting my life back together and starting my business and everything. So it wasn't that part of it wasn't difficult for me, but still there was some difficulty. And neuroplasticity is really what made the difference for me because my brain was already used to examining new information in a welcoming kind of a way, but looking at it critically, just as I'm looking at the old information critically. And believe it or not, music helps you do that. It helps you think. Not that you're thinking about music when you're studying such this and that, but it just helps you develop those new pathways in your brain. It contributes to a healthy brain, if I may say that. I'm not sure what a healthy brain means, but I'm going to say it anyway. Um, so what I'm not necessarily recommending music therapy. I wouldn't know what therapy to recommend, who you would go to, how you would do it, um, because it's a scientific thing. It's like a medical community area. Um, and I know people that will say that, well, I listen to binaural bits, half an hour of what, or actually it goes on forever, and it puts me to sleep. That's not really therapy. I mean, you might think it is. Well, if it is for you, that's fine, but it's really just a repetition of something that after a while it's meaningless. It just repeats itself. It's like listening to the ocean roar. That's a beautiful thing to fall asleep to or even experience when you're awake. But it's not really putting anything new into our head. It's just the sound of the surf. So music is all those things I talked about: intervals, tones, intonation, beats, rhythms, lyrics that are good that marry all that stuff. Um, so that so without getting into the actual therapy, there are two things that we can do to experience the healing power of music when it comes to developing those new pathways in our brains. We can take up an instrument, but which is great. You want to learn how to play the guitar, the piano, the violin, the flute, whatever. That's fantastic. That will definitely help you. But for some reason you might say, I don't want to do that. I don't have time. I'm not musically inclined. Well, first of all, I would say don't sell yourself short. Go ahead and try it. But you don't necessarily have to take up an instrument to experience the neuroplasticity that music can create in our brains. Just listening to music, thinking about what we're listening to, and really examining it while we're appreciating the beauty of it for the beauty's sake. Not, we don't have to listen to something incredibly complex and be able to explain all of what's going on in order to experience the beauty of it. We can just look at it like a flower that's just beautiful because it's beautiful, period. Or we could look at it and say, well, yeah, but on the cellular level, it's really beautiful. So what I'm going to suggest is music to listen to that you can just put on in the background and just say, hey, how about those Seattle Mariners? Aren't they not going to cover off the ball? Hey, by the way, would you mind passing the potatoes? You could have it on in the background and have casual conversation and enjoy it, or you can listen to it really, really listening and thinking like how beautiful this is. I'm so moved by it, and thinking about what's really going on. Like just imagining, for example, um, Andrew Lloyd Webber, right, is a king of doing this. He writes music like Phantom of the Opera. Some of the melodies in Phantom of the Opera are so the intervals are incredible. I'm not going to try to remember the words, and I'm certainly not going to sing too much because you'll hate it. But there's that one melody, and I forget the name of the song, where it goes. Da, 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 da. I mean, that's all over the place. That jumps more than an octave from the first note to the second note. Da, 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 da 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 da, and then another octave. It's all over, but it happens to be a beautiful melody. But as we're hearing that, even if we're just watching a singer or we're just listening to the audio with no video, just imagine in your mind what a pianist's hands must be doing to hit those notes. It's got to be going da, 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 da. Or a violinist has to be going da, 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 da. Those are big harmonic jumps. So just picture that in your mind, or if it's a tighter melody, just think about his fingers, how they're moving. So you're marrying the physical with the the oral, the mental, and you're thinking about it. So I want to make certain suggestions on things to listen to that I think are beautiful, but you might not. It's okay, but just try them. And I want to start with the Baroque era. So we're talking about 1600s. This is a long time ago. Uh, there's a lot of Baroque music, like a lot of Bach, J.S. Bach, that's very complex, a lot of counterpoint. It's always great to listen to, but that's the kind of stuff you might not like if you're not into so-called classical music. I say so-called because classical really covers 80 years from the 1700s to the 1800s, but we think of it as anything that involves an orchestra. So it's like goes back 600 or 800 years. But anyway, so the Baroque period, which basically means ornate, it means complicated or beautiful, ornate music. I would say listen to Bach's, and I mean J.S. Bach, Johann Sebastian Bach, Jesu, Joy of Man's Desiring, because it's a very pretty melody. It's not really fast, and the main melody appears in a certain instrument. If it's on the piano, let's say it would be the right hand, but in an orchestra it would be something different. But in other words, the melody appears in one range, one melodic range, and then that particular instrument or that hand or what have you is becomes the accompaniment to the left hand or the other part of the orchestra, repeating the melody in some different way. Well, there's beauty to that. There's natural beauty to that you don't really need to understand what's going on, anything I just said, to appreciate it. But you can also experience it that way. And you don't have to be a musician. You don't have to have taken any music courses. You don't have to play an instrument. You don't have to be able to sing. Just listen to it in that way, just thinking like, what's going on there? I can't imagine. Like, what is he really doing? And enough of that is really going to generate some neuroplasticity in your brain. So moving forward, we come to the classical period, which Mozart is a big name in the classical period. He wrote a piece called Eine kleine Nachtmusik that is, I guess it's almost a cliche nowadays. It's so well known, but he wrote it in one day. He was actually working on, I don't know, like an opera or something, and he was asked to create this work for an evening like soiree. They said, "Can you do it?" He goes, "Yeah, yeah, sure." So like in a half an hour or something, or an hour, he wrote this four movement piece. It's really beautiful. It's got fast parts. It's got slow parts. Just try listening to it. You might even say I've heard this before, but just do a YouTube search on it and look up Eine kleine Nachtmusik. Moving forward a little bit to the Romantic period, Beethoven kind of straddled the classical and Romantic period. He actually ushered in the Romantic period with his Fifth Symphony. But that's not the one I'm going to tell you to listen to, although it's a great one. And I'm not going to tell you to listen to the Ninth Symphony, another beautiful one. I'm going to tell you to listen to the Sixth Symphony, which is also called the Pastoral or Pastoral. Um, It's just absolutely gorgeous to me. It's one of the most beautiful pieces of music, especially the first movement. But throughout it, it's just beautiful, beautiful music. There's a certain amount of repetition in it, so that might kind of help you to kind of like think, oh yeah, I've heard that theme before, and here it is again. But again, it's a piece that you can just have it on in the background, wash the dishes or whatever. But if you really want to listen to it, it's going to really be an intellectual, beautiful intellectual experience for you. Another piece in the Romantic period that I always have to recommend because it's my favorite piece of all time, and it's going to sound silly because it's like a 3 or 4 minute piece, smack in the middle of Carmen's or Bizet's opera Carmen. It's called the intermezzo because intermezzo means it means middle. I don't know, it means in the middle or something like that, but mezzo meaning middle. So it's actually the prelude to the third act, but there are 4 acts, so it's the middle of the opera. There's no singing. Don't worry about a lady with horns that the fat lady sings. None of that. It's just the orchestra. Uh, just and it's got a certain amount of counterpoint, which kind of goes back to the Baroque era, but it's definitely French grand opera about a story in Spain, but written in French, librettos in French. Beautiful, beautiful music. Please, please listen to it and tell me what you think. Going forward, I mean, you have Debussy and the Impressionist period is all really great stuff. But then going into the 20th century, I would tend more towards jazz. A lot of what we call classical is sort of disturbing to some people. There's a lot of beautiful things that happen too, like a lot of Gershwin is great. But jazz, again, is something that can be intellectual, very stimulating, very cerebral, very complex. And there's beauty in that. There's beauty in the melody itself, and there's also beauty in the complexity. But it's not everybody's cup of tea, and I get that. If you just say, look, I'll listen to it, Gary. I'll try it out. Well, I'd say look up Miles Davis, John Coltrane, uh, Dizzy Gillespie, Bird, or Charlie Parker, Wayne Shorter, one of my favorite saxophone player, and a great songwriter. Um, you can look up any of those, but you might give it a listen and say, yeah, thanks for the suggestion, but I just don't like it. Okay, fine, that's your thing. You don't have to like it. So I would say if you're more in tune with like listening to like actual songs, and you wonder what's the big deal with jazz, just look up on YouTube, look up or Spotify, whatever you like to use. Look up Ella Fitzgerald and Joe Pass. Joe Pass, the word Pass. His name is Joe Pass. Look up Ella Fitzgerald and Joe Pass and just play anything. I don't care what it is because it's all songs. You're not going to hear like a 20 minute, not for the most part. You're not going to hear like a 20-minute improvisation where every member of the band has a lick. It's you're going to hear the beautiful voice of Ella with Joe Pass, one of the greatest guitarists ever, who's a fine, fine jazz musician, knows everything about jazz chops you need to know. Or or listen to Ella Fitzgerald and Oscar Peterson, who's just as good a pianist as Joe Pass is a guitarist. Yeah, I can't say enough about those people. It's just if you don't like it, you don't like it. But I'd be kind of amazed if you walk away from that and say I didn't get anything out of it. And just again, listen while you're ironing or listen while you're changing the oil in your car, but also take an opportunity to listen to it wherever you listen to music where you can really concentrate and really think about what you're listening to. So that's enough about that stuff. The other thing when it comes to lyrics, and by the way, when you listen to the old Ella, and Joe Pass stuff, it's going to be lyrics, and it's going to be good lyrics for the most part. I mean, you might hear like a Tisket a Tasket, which is silly, but it's good lyrics. And a Gershwin, anything with lyrics by Gershwin the lyrics are written by his brother Ira. That's always good. All those plays and everything. But moving forward into the more modern era, a lot of people think of Bob Dylan as like a great lyricist. I'm not a big fan of Bob Dylan. I think he's an awful musician. I mean, his guitar playing and his harmonica playing is absolutely dreadful. It's not even music, in my opinion, really. And his singing is terrible. So I don't like him. But he has written some really good lyrics. And I'm not going to say they're all great. I don't belong to this club that thinks like he could just do anything and it's great because he's written some stuff that's really trite and really, really terrible. But there are some Dylan songs that are really great lyrics. And I'll just tell you one that's my favorite. It's called Love Minus Zero Over No Limit. You could just call it Love Minus Zero. But it's Love Minus Zero and a colon, no limit. The colon actually means over or divided by, believe it or not. And if you try to figure out what that means, good luck. But um, it does have something to do with the lyrics. And you'll notice in those lyrics, whether you read them or listen to them or both, that they all each verse has the same structure as the next verse, well, which is typical of Dylan and all folk music, really. But they all do the same thing lyrically in terms of the things they're expressing, but always in a different way. And I'll be the first to admit that there are a few lines that I, for the life of me, can't figure out what the heck they mean. Like, what is that one line? In ceremonies of the horsemen, even the pawn must hold a grudge. I have no idea. I've never heard Dylan explain it. I've never heard any critic, any music critic, any poet make any sense out of it. So it doesn't mean anything. But the rest of it has a lot of meaning, and so you kind of fit it in, and you say, okay, I get it. He's kind of saying the same thing in a different way, and I just love the way the lyrics work with the melody, which I really think is a good melody. It's a simple melody, but it just the lyrics with that melody just make it happen for me. So again, listen to it while you're walking the dog, or whatever you're doing, or you're just trying to sleep, or listen to it when you're when you have time to really listen. Anything by Joni Mitchell, great lyricist, great songwriter. To me, one of the best songwriters in the history of our country, of the United States, I should say. Um, and then I want to say something about rap, just very briefly. I never liked rap, and I still don't. I hated it, initially in the what 80s or late 70s. I don't even remember when it first came out, but and a lot of it in the opening years seemed to be about shooting the kneecaps off cops, or forcing some sex act on a woman because you can. Just I just thought this is the most exploitive crap I've ever heard. I don't want to hear it. But as an art form, it didn't remain there, and that was just one iteration of it. Even in the beginning, you had guys like Will Smith doing a completely PG, version of, or G-rated version of it. I still don't like it, and the music is incredibly simple. It doesn't hardly ever change. It's just like dum, 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 dum. It just goes on and on, repeating the same thing for 5 minutes. So it drives me crazy to listen to it. But it's not about the music itself. It's about the lyrics. The lyrics to most rap songs, or a lot of rap songs, I should say, are very, very clever. They're just, and I can't believe these guys can. It's not just that they wrote it all out and thought about it. A lot of times they make it up. I've seen people make it up on the spot, like right to my face. You just tell them, like, okay, do me a rap song about my toaster oven, and they'd be flying. I mean, I don't even know how these guys can think so quickly. It's amazing to me. So that's going to produce some neuroplasticity. You can be sure of that, because it's not just the words, but it's how the rhythm of the words marry the music, which might not be great music, but it's music. So anyway, that's all I really wanted to say about neuroplasticity and how it can help us with cognitive dissonance, which is all about conquering or actually working with cognitive dissonance, recognizing that the brain naturally works that way. We just want to get it to where we're not automatically rejecting new thoughts because it doesn't agree with the old thought, or automatically accepting a new thought because it disagrees with the old thought, which is what a lot of XJ dubs do, to be honest with you. Now they're out, and they realize that there's nobody that can tell them that they can't be an alcoholic or a drug addict, or smoke cigarettes, or engage in risky sex constantly. So I'm going to do that. Well, maybe we really need to look at that new thought and examine it and say, all right, the old thought is nonsense, but maybe it's somewhere in the middle. So we got to be critical thinkers with regard to the old stuff that's in the unconscious and the new stuff that comes into the conscious mind, and maybe mix them, or whatever. But the point is that neuroplasticity is what we really need to develop, whether we know we're doing it or not, because that's what's going to help the brain to evolve and grow and form new connections. And that's going to affect our emotional health, because our emotions are direct effects of what we think at any given point in time. And even though we might have rejected a certain teaching years ago because we realized it was wrong, and that teaching has to do with what we think about ourselves, because we're a woman that was taught that you're second place citizen, you're just, you can take a job, I guess, but don't try to think that you can make decisions in the household because your husband's there to do that, and you're not allowed to give talks. You can't be elders, and I don't know why they'd want to be elders anyway, but so our thoughts about ourselves are shaped by those teachings that we've rejected a long time ago. But those thoughts can actually come back every so often and prevent us maybe from getting that promotion at work because we don't think that we're qualified for it. And it's like nonsense. We're qualified to do it, really, believe me. It doesn't matter if we're man, woman, or whatever our age is. how many years we were in. So that's what I mean about, um, you know, developing our brains to the point where the cognitive dissonance is under control. We've got it tamed. We can listen to new thoughts and decide whether they're valid or not, and we can bring up old thoughts and decide whether we still believe them or not. We're not chained by the old thoughts conquering the new, or the new thoughts conquering the old. It's the, it's whatever makes sense at a given point in time. So I hope you enjoyed this. I'd welcome your comments. I don't know where you're listening to this because I put it on YouTube and then publish the link, but you can write to me directly or whatever you want to do. I'd love to hear your thoughts on it. Okay, so thanks for listening and watching.